Ren from Hallowed Be Thy Game, and today we're talking about the top 5 things I want to see in Breath of the Wild 2. Let's check it out. I want to begin by saying that Breath of the Wild is one of my favorite games, if not my favorite game of all time, and I am so excited for its sequel. With the devs confirming that the tone of Breath of the Wild 2 is going to be similar in atmosphere to Majora's Mask, my hype levels are through the roof. These are just things I would love to see in the sequel. So with that, let's begin with number 5, a Symphony Orchestra. Now, with the very nature of these lists, they always contain subjective material that can be left to the personal tastes and preferences of the player. Well, I want to begin by saying that the music of Breath of the Wild set out to achieve a goal of depicting a Hyrule that was in a state of isolation, turmoil, and it achieved this goal in spades. However, I think that Breath of the Wild 2 will more than likely not tell the same story again, but rather carry tonal changes that should be reflected in the music. The immediately lethal threat of Calamity Ganon has been stopped. For now. But I would love for this atmosphere of change to be reflected in the style of music that we predominantly hear. There doesn't need to be music playing 100% of the time, as I felt the restraint shown in Breath of the Wild helped epic moments carry more weight. I mean, I am a Dark Souls fan after all, and we rarely hear music in that. But I would love for there to be less synthesizer music, but more use of classical instruments that we see near the end of the first game. Breath of the Wild is arguably my favorite game of all time, but in my humble opinion, one of the weakest parts of the game was the OST. Yet still, it rests proudly as one of the greatest games I've ever played. I think with an orchestrated soundtrack and the same meaningful use of the OST, it would leave an impact and help relate the changes in tone. The devs have already stated that Breath of the Wild 2 will be closer in feel to Majora's Mask than any other entry. Having a haunting soundtrack to serenade us around the new Shadow Temple would help solidify Breath of the Wild 2's distinct impact on the series. Number 4. Traditional items returning. Breath of the Wild gave us the god-tier mechanics of the Sheikah Slate that has provided nigh endless amounts of physics-based fun. I am curious how Breath of the Wild 2 will approach the replacement or reintegration into the sequel. One thing I know though, for the love of the Triforce, please bring back the hookshot. I think with items, the functionality of the Sheikah Slate can still be in Breath of the Wild without necessarily being the same thing. Zelda has always been a series that is synonymous with cool gadgets and magical items that help Link explore and conquer obstacles. Breath of the Wild showed the endless possibilities of an open world RPG and the interactions that can take place between the player and the gameplay. Speed shoes, jump boots, hookshot, portal-like mirrors, wands, and rods, oh my. We can still keep the same beautiful sandbox gameplay of Breath of the Wild and have traditional items. And while I'm fond of these conventional items, I can't wait to see what the developers come up with in Breath of the Wild 2. Number 3. Dial back on the Trollier Mechanics. Look, I'll be brief. But 2 mechanics from Breath of the Wild were just top tier trolls at times. Obviously, I'm talking about weapon durability. This is one of the aspects of Breath of the Wild that you either loved or you hated. And you know what? I get it. It offered inventory management and was great for the Master Sword trials where you had to scrounge for weapons and be very careful with them. However, for the main game, I never found myself using the unbelievably powerful weapons until I got to bosses. I would love for this system to be refined or improved with maybe the potential to repair some items. But in the end, it may be better to instead pursue combat styles with little to no durability loss to allow players to have the choice in what combat styles they'd prefer. The last trolling mechanic I'd love to see dialed back in Breath of the Wild 2 is rain. Whew, golly, nothing is more painful than needing to climb out of an area but finding it has started to rain. Look, when people find wild success posting guides on how to start fires in the rain, you know there's a group of people annoyed deeply by this mechanic. I love environmental hazards, but slipping while climbing in the rain was painful. Number 2. Zelda as a companion. Breath of the Wild fully embodied a wild and free story. Link wakes up out of his chamber and then immediately sets out alone to explore the untamed and often perilous lands of Hyrule to save Zelda. It was a groundbreaking change for the Zelda series with many gameplay improvements and changes. For me, it showed the developers were able to take something that had not been done before in the series and find wild success. I think this is the perfect opportunity to take the same risk-taking spirit and explore the potential of Zelda stepping out of the role as the damsel in distress and have her team up with Link. Now, I know that Link having a companion throughout the story is nothing new. Heck, Midna is amazing, and if you are blinded by rose-tinted goggles, then Navi may be there as well. Zelda being a companion for Link would do a couple of things. First, it would take away the solitary exploration feel that the first Breath of the Wild had. It would then ensure that this wouldn't feel like a retread of the original content. Second, assuming that Breath of the Wild 2 will take place again in Hyrule, it would allow us to share our experiences with Zelda and give a new perspective on situations. AI companions can be done well, but it takes a delicate approach to ensure they don't tread over into the Resident Evil 4 territory. The recent Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity gave me a taste of how amazing it would be to be able to switch between characters. This kind of decision making would leave its own distinct mark on the series. It would be incredible to have this as an option in the sequel to one of the greatest Zelda games ever made. It would also give some fun customization options to outfits and design both Zelda and Link. One of my favorite features in Breath of the Wild was the ability to do some fashion souls. How cool would it be to outfit Link with fire-resistant gear and Zelda with some sweet Zoran gear to potentially switch between the two to optimize your play? Breath of the Wild has left some Goron-sized shoes to fill, and even though I usually say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, it is obvious that Breath of the Wild 2 will need to do more than just ride on the coattails of its predecessor. I'd love to see some unique puzzle solving between Link and Zelda and shrine-type puzzles, potentially unlocking combat abilities and combos between the two, and with Nintendo improving their online functionality, it'd give the perfect opportunity for co-op in some capacity, be it maybe a separate function in Breath of the Wild 2. The possibilities are endless, and I think this is the largest opportunity for Breath of the Wild 2 to make its own mark. Number 1. Pet dogs. But seriously. Number 1. Traditional dungeons and unique looking bosses. Breath of the Wild was a classic in every sense of the word, but despite being a revolutionary game, I can't help but admit that I was a little let down by the lack of unique looking bosses and dungeon appearance. It took away from the impact I felt when I finally reached the dreaded boss room. The fights themselves were unique, but the models being so similar, it minimized the experience of finally cleansing the divine beasts. They still had extremely unique mechanics for the bosses, and the dungeons were technically distinct from one another in puzzle solving. However, they were so visually similar in every aspect to one another, I can't honestly say I remember anything about them other than their iconic appearances on the outside. The Zelda series has so many wonderful aspects that make them iconic. Keys, maps, and those juicy items that we find in dungeons that help them stand out in our minds. Growing up and playing Ocarina of Time, I have visuals of the Forest Temple with its spooky maze at the beginning, and having it topped off with one of the most epic fights in gaming with the Phantom Ganon encounter and him jumping in between the paintings. Heck, even though it scared us to our souls, who doesn't remember the first time through the Water Temple and the Lovecraftian boss waiting at the end of it? The Shadow Temple? This is just one Zelda game, and there are so many to choose from the series. Let me know down in the comments what's your favorite Zelda dungeon of all time. But that's just it. Breath of the Wild 2 needs to take the unique puzzle-solving mechanics of the glorious shrines and implement them with unique dungeon aesthetics. Carry this over into bosses, and we have ourselves a match made in the Skyview Temple. Well, there you have it. There's my top 5 things I'd love to see in Breath of the Wild 2. Let me know down in the comments what you'd like to see in the sequel. Like this video if you liked it, subscribe and hit that notification bell so we can keep hanging out in the future. And until then, I'll see you all next time.